Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Coming up on our final segment here, we've been doing a lot of NBA talk through the day, talking about All-Stars, talking about the Lakers, talking about the Knicks, sort of those big market, all those types of things, topics. We're going to stick with the idea of a big market here, as there was a very interesting Athletic article that was posted earlier this week talking about the dysfunction of the New York Jets. So we are going to be covering that, giving sort of some of the takeaways from that article for what was a very interesting, I guess you could say, Jets season. Anybody who watched the Jets this year, you sort of, as soon as Aaron Rodgers went down, we all sort of knew what to expect, that this was going to be another messy situation for them after seeming like they were just a quarterback away the year before. They come in, they get Aaron Rodgers, who is supposed to sort of get them over that hump, and instead he goes out on the first drive of the season. So again, even without this article, we saw how messy things were. There were little tidbits that came in and out about how, Saleh was frustrated with Zach Wilson some behind the scenes, and that they were potentially looking at quarterbacks, but Saleh kept saying, we're sticking with Wilson, he's our guy, all of that. But this article just came out the other day, and it sort of gave us an inside look at this dysfunction that was going on throughout the course of the season, and an anonymous Jets coach called it an effing mess. And I think that it really goes back to before the season even started. If you remember, it was last summer, springish, where Aaron Rodgers was potentially going to make this decision on whether or not he wanted a trade to the Jets, and that was all that was going on in the media every day. Because at that time we were at a little bit of a dead point as far as the sports calendar, and it was Rodgers just dominating the charts in terms of people talking about him and trying to figure out what was going on. And I think that because of all this attention that he gained, it almost hurt the Jets that they were so heavily tied to this story that at this point, if they failed to get Aaron Rodgers, it would have been a failure for them as a whole. And they would have, Aaron Rodgers is not the most popular guy, I would say. So maybe there would have been some sort of differing opinions, but I think that as a whole, people would have considered it a failure for the Jets, and that's when sort of they really started digging in, trying to do whatever they could to get Aaron Rodgers in their city. Now again, the whole idea was that they were just a quarterback away, that was it, and then if they had gotten a quarterback such as Aaron Rodgers, they would be set. And again, who knows if Aaron Rodgers doesn't go down on that first drive of the season. We don't know how the Jets season would have played out, but there were definitely still concerns even despite just the quarterback as we were sort of ramping into the season. The offensive line especially was clearly lackluster, which didn't help Zach Wilson once he got put in. But sticking with the offseason real quick, this article from The Athletic it highlighted how the Jets owner, Woody Johnson, sat down to meet with Aaron Rodgers, and he was supposedly starstruck, was the word that the article used, which isn't really a great sign when you are trying to sort of, with a level head, put together the best football roster. If your owner, who runs the whole organization essentially, is starstruck by this one guy. And that was sort of reinforced by the other moves that they made without the throughout the season and that off season where they ended up bringing in Nathaniel Hackett, Rodgers' former coach that he had a very strong affinity to. Hackett coming off of a miserable season with Detroit. As A-Tate lets us know in the comments, he thinks the Jets are a long way from making the playoffs even with Rodgers. I think that this year, the other part of it, they would have had a chance to make the playoffs this season, especially the way that the year played out. And with the 7 seed really being up for grabs for a lot of that year, and these other teams that didn't even have their quarterbacks competing for these spots as well. But you saw, and something that sort of went under the radar during this whole roster building process, was the fact that outside of Garrett Wilson, who we can all agree is a very talented, very young receiver, they didn't really have much else going on, which is part of why the concerns came in as they were doing this whole Rodgers campaign of bringing in Allen Lazard, bringing in Randall Cobb, these guys who haven't really been big-time performers, especially Cobb. And not that Cobb was necessarily a focal point, but he hadn't really produced much on the field in the NFL in years. Allen Lazard had a terrible season, which sort of got into a little bit of the dysfunction as he was calling the team out for not playing with enough effort, despite him being terrible. And there was this idea about the offense and defense not being fully aligned, even dating back to last year when Zach Wilson, after the Patriots game, that the Patriots won 10-3 on the walk-off punt, where he said that he didn't feel like he let the defense down despite only scoring 3 points, and the defense itself not even allowing a touchdown and them still losing that game. And they were trying to keep that balance all throughout. And here was an example this year where reportedly it did not go over well when Lazard said they didn't play with enough effort, and he had gotten a somewhat sizable contract from the Jets. Again, presumably also a lot of the reasoning behind that was to try and lure Aaron Rodgers. And when they made these moves, such as Hackett at the time and Allen Lazard, there was no guarantees that they were getting Rodgers, and they said that whether they get him or not, they feel comfortable with the decisions. I don't think that that's fully true. I think that they probably were banking on this Rodgers thing to work out one way or another anyways. I don't know if they ever would have let him sort of slip through the cracks. And who knows? There was the whole darkness retreat saga that took place with Rodgers, where is he in the dark? Is he not? Is he retiring? Is he going to play? All this sort of weird communication going on across the media and with him himself. So obviously the Jets do end up trading for him. They are prominently on the Hard Knocks series, and Rodgers is friendly. He's trying to build up relationships with his offensive lineman, Mekhi Becton, former first-round pick. He's really trying to work with him. He's working with Zach Wilson, and everything seemed good. He was on the sidelines during the preseason games, trying to coach up Zach Wilson, trying to help draw up some of the plays even and work through that process and take him under his wing and help him develop. Because at this point, Rodgers is fully confident that he is going to be there for at least that past season and presumably next season as well. So everything's fine when everything is fine, but obviously he tears his Achilles tendon on the first drive of the season, and everything just sort of starts to fall apart for them, which again is something that we saw from the outside, but this article gave us a look into some of the drama that was going on behind the scenes, where they didn't end up going to sign another quarterback. There were trade rumors about should they go get Kirk Cousins when the Vikings weren't playing well, and then the Vikings sort of started to turn around, but then Cousins has his season-ending injury, and they sort of kicked the can on a couple of free agent quarterbacks, but ultimately decided that Zach Wilson was the best chance to win, even when the likes of a Joe Flacco, who even took the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs within their own conference, he had reached out to the Jets about wanting to play, and they closed that door. Not that I necessarily think things would have been different because of how bad that offensive line was in New York, like Ate points out about how it was not just the quarterback this year, and even on another level to that, you look at the offensive coordinator decision from Nathaniel Hackett. Now, this article was not very kind to him at all, but that's because behind the scenes, a lot of the people that were within that locker room, within that coaching staff, were not very high on him at all either. There was this idea that he designed the entire scheme around Aaron Rodgers, and when Rodgers went down, there was very little adjustments made to actually rectify that and change up what they were thinking of doing to help Zach Wilson get better. There was talks about how his lack of preparation, the meetings that he would call were sort of scarce, and when they did, it seemed like last minute planning. And there was a lot of criticism about the fact that during the games he would not make adjustments. Specifically, there was a part of the article that talked about the game they played against the Dallas Cowboys, where it was one of the other coaches on the offensive side for the Jets said to Hackett that they need some sort of help on the left side. Micah Parsons, who always causes havoc, really, was causing a lot of trouble on that side of the line. They need some extra reinforcements there, and he did nothing for it. Parsons ended up wrecking that game. Again, this was the Jets at this point, led by Zach Wilson, who probably didn't have a chance of beating the Cowboys when the Cowboys were sort of rolling to start the year. But again, it shows a little bit of the just lack of confidence I think that I had myself during the year, and just reaffirmed by even within that building of Nathaniel Hackett being able to sort of figure out how to turn this thing around. And he is under contract for next season, so he's going to be coming back. I think that that's sort of one of the other interesting parts of this whole thing, is this comes out now in end of January, early February, so a lot of the coaching cycle has already been through. The Jets kind of have no choice but to run it back next season, and especially with Robert Saleh, where things got really messy there, as the article pointed out. There was frustration. He was wearing on the outside these positive vibes shirts and everything, but he thought it was unfair how much scrutiny that the Jets were getting in comparison to the Giants. So a little bit of a concern with being fit for the big market. And not that it's an easy job to coach the New York Jets, because you are under scrutiny, especially when your history as a franchise has been so grim for the past handful of years that somebody needs to step into that job and sort of change the narrative. And Saleh knows that to a certain level he has to be that guy. That's what he signed up for. But he was feeling the frustration, and I can understand that, but calling it unfair is a little bit tough. Additionally, he was upset with the front office for the fact that he felt like they weren't really doing him any favors with the quarterback position. How he thought, how am I supposed to win with this guy and Zach Wilson? And it was just a very messy situation. There was even talks about this whole leaking information where he was taking people's phones away and all of this messy stuff. And it seems like the paranoia got to him a little bit. Again, this is a very high stress position, being the head coach of the New York Jets. But that's once again what you signed up for. And, I like Saleh. I think he's done a very good job on the defensive side of the ball. Now, has he proven that he can really win anything in the NFL yet? No. But I also don't think that that's totally fair because he hasn't necessarily had the pieces around him to do so. So, all that being said, especially with this article coming out now, next year really becomes make or break for him. And, we'll see. Aaron Rodgers is expected to be back for next season. He has no plans of retiring. But a 40-year-old coming off of a torn Achilles injury, I think, is very scary territory if you're just banking on that again. Now, we still have the whole offseason to see what they can do to make other types of moves and sort of figure out how to make this thing work the best as possible. But if they fail to, I think that there's a very good chance that Saleh could be coaching his final season in New York. And again, I always say this, I'm never calling for other people's jobs. I think that's a pretty dirty thing to do. But the reality is, with the way that this has all played out, this definitely becomes a very high stakes season for Saleh to sort of hit that turning point. So with that being said, that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Just a reminder to like and follow. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host these shows. We will be back on Monday at 2 o'clock, so we will catch you then. And one last time, thanks again for tuning in. Have a great weekend.